Retrofit Escapade has been the talk of the town recently, and I wanted to find out why. I mean, I know why. It's because it's doing some absolutely crazy things right now, but I wanted to see why mathematically. How is this 900 RPM machine gun, typically one of the most ignored weapon archetypes in the game, especially on machine guns, making so much noise? Well, before we get to the math, how about I just show you a clip real quick. So all of these explosions, that's Gjallarhorn in action. Although technically it's just volatile rounds. You can get this to happen with anything that causes your weapons to get volatile rounds, but Gjallarhorn is by far the easiest. This ends up proccing volatile rounds an obnoxiously, basically uncountable amount of times to the point where it has been breaking encounters in the game. I don't anticipate this to stay the way that it is for a very long time, because there's a big difference between something being ridiculously strong and something that is causing the game to malfunction. But it's certainly doing a lot of damage. So how much? Well, let's hop into Grasp of Avarice to find out. The roll we're going to be utilizing is 4th times the charm and Target Lock. Target Lock is a perk that gradually increases the damage you deal on a target as long as you hold down the trigger and keep hitting the target. For the sake of my brain and everyone's time and sanity, I'm not really going to be going into the in-depth mechanics of the damage ramp of Target Lock, but there is a great Reddit thread in the description that discusses it more if you're into that kind of thing. To summarize Mr. Rock DC's findings from Reddit, on average, Target Lock starts ramping at around 85% of your base magazine remaining and gains stacks based on how many shots are remaining in the base magazine. At maximum stacks, your shots will be doing 40% increased damage, but over the course of an entire magazine, your DPS will be about 25% higher, and with something like 4th times the charm, about 30% higher over the course of an entire magazine. To make things as simple as possible, I went into Grasp of Avarice and tested different machine guns and current meta weapons. I chose Grasp of Avarice because Lost Sector bosses are not cutting it, and this is one of very few bosses in the game that will just stand in a spot and let you shoot them uninterrupted for a while, and also has high health. I had my teammates using Divinity with 100% uptime, not only on this test, but every test, multiple divinities, to ensure that I would never lose 4th times the charm procs. Is it possible to have 100% uptime on div with only one person using it? I think so, but most people should expect divinity to drop off for a brief time while your div player reloads in your average situation. This weapon needs to be able to hit 100% of its crits, otherwise we kind of lose the whole point of the weapon. To get some sort of a control test, I started with 77 shots in the mag. I had my 2 perks, Target Lock, 4th times, not enhanced, and I had Divinity loaded up, and I went to town. I did not have extended mag or any sort of magazine buff. This was just a random drop. I was not graced with a magazine buff, so what are you gonna do? And in this test, I dealt 452,897 damage with boss spec in 10 seconds on the dot, give or take a couple of frames. I'm going to do some very light rounding in this video, nothing that's going to affect the overall video though. That makes DPS incredibly easy to calculate. I'm just going to swing that decimal place over to the left one, and we get 45,290 DPS rounded up. Before we continue, just dividing damage by time spent shooting does not give an accurate view of DPS over the long term, because reloads need to be included as well, and those will be accounted for when they need to be accounted for. It's just a bit easier to conceptualize one magazine's worth of damage and divide it by time, since every weapon also needs to reload and start up again, and weapons aren't gaining any DPS after a reload, I'll tell you that much. Also, I did this whole video without doing any sort of put on double reserves and then rally and then switch off stuff, just to keep things simple. In the next test, we switched to backup mag to retest the age-old question, boss spec or backup mag? Historically, it's been boss spec. It took me 12.75 seconds to fire Retrofit from full to 0 with all of the 4th times procs for a total of 539,474 damage, or 42,311 DPS. I guess I was wondering if fourth time's the charm was going to help here a bit more. It does in the total damage department, but not in the DPS department. We'll go over when you want more total damage versus higher DPS later in the video. In the next test, I put on boss spec, and I put on an activated Gjallarhorn. I did the same thing as our control test, and wow. 704,502 damage in 10 seconds, over 70,000 DPS, which is a 55% increase over not using volatile rounds. That's how crazy this volatile rounds situation is right now, although volatile rounds only last 10 seconds when activated via Gjallarhorn. However, hunters can get some incredibly short dodge cooldowns, making reactivating not that big of a deal. So now it's time to compare to some other stuff, starting in the machine gun category, of which there are basically two competitors, Thunderlord and Xenophage. We took a look at Thunderlord with its new catalyst, loading bullets into your magazine from reserves every time you get a lightning strike from just holding down the trigger. This basically makes it so you can fire the gun from full to zero reserves without needing a single reload. I did multiple tests and got an average of just over 1 million damage, 1.044 million damage. I think this variance was caused by the lightning bolts not triggering the most consistently. Destiny has a bunch of issues with frame rate and that affecting various events, like how much damage you're dealing with Storm Grenade to how much damage you're receiving from certain enemies. So I'm fine with taking an average here. It's not going to be perfect because of that variance. Now, you're seeing 1 million damage, and you're like, okay, case closed, it's Thunderlord. And why don't you hold up a sec, because we don't have all the data. It took Thunderlord 19.5 seconds to fire all 220 shots that it had. I chose to not stop it in the middle, because that's not how you're going to deal damage with this thing. You're just going to hold the trigger. So if we take our average of 1.044 million damage and divide by 19.5 seconds, we get 53,538 DPS, which is higher than Retrofit without volatile rounds. Okay, so now case closed? No, because we have some intangibles to account for, like the fact that yes, we did more DPS, but we are now completely out of power ammo. We burned through everything we had for that. Retrofit still has a significant amount of ammo remaining after just one magazine. So yes, Thunderlord does more DPS and will be better in those kinds of time frames. But if we have longer time frames to account for, or if you're not able to fill back up on power ammo for the next DPS cycle, then you might start to run into some trouble. How about Xenophage? Has it been restored to its former glory? 13 shots in 6.1666 repeating, of course, seconds at 30,488 damage per shot comes in at a whopping 64,272 DPS before a reload, which was much higher than I was expecting for some reason. Now we're post-reload, add in another magazine for a DPS value of 47,325 as it takes 16.75 seconds to completely empty 2 magazines. Not exactly a slouch by any means, but again, after these 2 magazines, you're left with barely any ammo at all. You need to use everything. So, within machine gun world, the difference is coming down to one big factor. How long are you getting to deal damage? For a 20-second window, something relatively short, if you're using Retrofit, you need to be gaining volatile rounds for it to be the strat. For most people, that's going to read as, you need to be using Gjallarhorn, but if a future method to gain volatile easily comes out for Titans and Warlocks, then you're in the game too. Without volatile rounds, Retrofit does pretty good work, but it isn't as good in terms of DPS as other options. But it allows you to pump out a lot of damage for not that much of a cost. The benefit is that you actually get ammo to use in other parts of a fight, or even the next damage phase, or multiple damage phases, but you just don't do as much damage overall. However, Retrofit also needs basically perfect divinity uptime or a crit spot on a boss that is nearly impossible to miss. You need to remember that all the numbers that Retrofit was putting up were in nearly perfect conditions, whereas all other weapons have some level of leniency. How many bosses are there where you can actually sit for longer than 20 to 30 seconds and deal damage to a target actively in the game? In Last Wish, maybe Morgeth, but it's not really that big of a deal there. I'm not using it in Garden, really. King's Fall, it can do some work on War Priest, I suppose. Golgoroth is a pretty start and stop fight, but it's manageable. Oryx, too. It works pretty well in Vault of Glass, both bosses. Vow, maybe Caretaker a little bit, but definitely Rolk. That DPS phase is very long. Deepstone, Taniks can take a little bit of a beating, too, so it's definitely usable. I don't know how many times you're going to get multiple magazines in one phase without having to move or do something, but you'll definitely be able to do one at a minimum depending on the boss. A lot of this is meaningless without some comparisons to current meta things, so let's take another pass at some stuff we tested a while ago. We can start with Gjallarhorn, which did receive a pretty substantial 25% nerf to impact and detonation damage in patch 6.3.0. Gjallarhorn is just a blast to calculate the damage because a G-Horn rocket can change wildly on a rocket-to-rocket basis depending on if Wolfpack rounds decide that they want to hit the target or not. So, anyway, one G-Horn rocket dealt 72,000 damage in one test, and then in another test, 7 of them dealt 557,195 damage in 12 seconds. Kind of makes no sense at all because that's close to 80,000 damage per rocket, not 72,000. G-Horn is stupid, and I hate damage calculations for it. Either way, if we use that 557 test, that is 46,433 DPS, which is actually very close to Retrofit in terms of DPS, and we're using every rocket we have, and we're including reloads in that as well. Next, we have Bump in the Night with Chill Clip and Boss Spec, which is really only supposed to be used by 1, maybe 2 people per team. Everyone else should really be on Frenzy, but Frenzy is also fine for everyone if you just want to do that. I wanted to see damage numbers with and without Divinity for this one, mainly to see what kind of damage Chill Clip was providing, and then we can just factor in those buffs and debuffs after the fact. 3 rockets at 79,124 apiece, plus a bonus 45,554 damage from shattering the boss was 282,926 damage. Adding in Divinity would give us 325,364 damage in 3 rockets. Pretty good. The final 4 rockets would be another 79,000 per rocket, and then you add in Divinity, that gets us 689,335 total damage in 7 rockets, with Demolitionist reloading one of them automatically and the rest manually loaded. That takes 16.33 seconds to do for a DPS value of 42,212, bit lower than I was expecting. You can add in the 15% from Frenzy instead of Chill Clip and get a DPS value of 44,855. Just need to remember that Frenzy needs to be active before you start firing, otherwise your DPS is going to be sub 40k because Frenzy will not be active and you will not get the bonus. Quick tangent. Why are people saying Chill Clip for Bump in the Night for one person? The DPS in your test just now was lower. Well, in my example, I was the one shattering my own freeze with another rocket. So my first rocket slowed, my second rocket froze, and then my third rocket did the shatter. But it doesn't slow the boss again because we're doing the shatter, meaning my 4th rocket will slow, but then my 5th rocket doesn't freeze because Chill Clip is only in the top half of the magazine. In a raid setting, Rocket 1 is going to slow, Rocket 2 is going to freeze, and then before you fire your 3rd rocket, someone else is going to get the shatter effect basically immediately, so your 3rd rocket's going to slow, and then your 4th will freeze for another shatter, thus 2 shatters, which is just slightly in front of Frenzy for damage purposes. It's a little over 45,000 DPS. But again, only 1, maybe 2 people per raid team with Chill Clip. More than that, and it's kind of a waste because the game cannot keep up with that many freezes and shatters all happening at the same time, and or there's probably some sort of hidden internal cooldown on how often the target can be froze. At least that's my theory at the moment. I would love to get in a testing session on this, but it's definitely going to be super annoying, and I'm not looking forward to it. A Hothead with Vorpal and Adept Big Ones, just an example rocket that we had. 87,035 damage pre-div. That gets us 100,090 damage post-div times 7 rockets is 700,631 damage. in 19.13 seconds for, I didn't calculate the DPS. I didn't write it down. 36,000. 36,000. That's it. All right, 36,000. 36,624. And around it, 625. Okay, 36,624. That's not as good as I was expecting or hoping for. Next, we had Ascendancy with Explosive Light times 6, getting us 92,923 damage per rocket with Explosive Light. And then we had one without Explosive Light, gets us 631,984 damage in just under 15 seconds. Our DPS is 42,132. I know there's a lot of different God Roll rockets out there. I don't have every single variation. I was not going to test every single variation, but you should know that generally speaking, the less frequently you have to reload, the higher your DPS is going to be. Gjallarhorn has some really good DPS compared to these legendary rockets, despite lower individual damage per rocket, but it gets to reload 2 rockets at a time. That's what makes it good. That's what makes Clown Cartridge really good. I think we learned this in my rocket damage video that I did a while back, but I'm just reiterating here because I'm not going to go test every rocket variant in a machine gun video. I'm just not. Next, we have one of the current champions, Cataclysmic, with 4th times and bait and switch. 9.66 seconds to fire 10 shots. All but one shot does 66,732 damage. Total damage is 650,019. Our DPS is a whopping 67,289. Wowie. However, this does not include the time to go proc bait and switch. If we include that time, it's going to be a couple of extra seconds, which brings our DPS down to 54,168 before a reload, which is then going to crater our DPS even more because we now have to reload and then get another bait and switch. As we know though, what makes linears so good is how long we get to use them thanks to their ammo efficiency, which is thanks to perks like Triple Tap, 4th times, and now possible Viced Stinger procs on applicable weapons. When you would normally run out of rocket ammo, you are only halfway through your linear ammo, if that, and you're typically doing the same or more DPS. That is what has made linears the champions of the Witch Queen era. I know I mentioned Retrofit in my Weapons to Craft Before Lightfall video, but I don't think I gave it a heavy enough recommendation. It was more like Copium, maybe machine guns will be DPS champs again one day, kind of a pick. But I do think it is worth grabbing one with 4th times and target lock just in case. The fate of this weapon's potential DPS ultimately relies on the fate of how Volatile rounds interacts with it. If Volatile rounds continues to behave the way it does now, then we definitely have something here, but if anything changes, we're going to need to reevaluate. My bet is that Bungie does make a change because they don't want their game breaking, but we just need to wait and see. I guess take advantage while you can. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.